And here we go. All right, well, good evening. My name is John Kenyon. I'm the Executive Director of the Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature Organization, and I'd like to welcome you to the 2020 Iowa City Book Festival. All of our events this year are online, and if you missed anything, you can catch up by visiting www.iowacitybookfestival.org for links to past events. This year's festival is supported by the City of Iowa City, the University of Iowa, the Iowa Arts Council, and Iowa Public Radio. One of our strongest partners in the festival each year is Prairie Lights Books. When the pandemic hit this year, most of our plans fell through. With the help of Prairie Lights and other partners, we rebuilt our schedule with several wonderful events. One of our heroes at Prairie Lights is Kathleen Johnson. Tonight, Kathleen joins us to moderate the conversation between Jill McCorkle and Ron Rash. Now, as we are getting started on the event, I wanted to let folks know about a couple of tools that they can use on screen. The Ask a Question button or words at the bottom of the screen. If you click that, it pulls up a box and you can submit a question. Kathleen will be able to see those and sprinkle your questions in amongst her own as the conversation unfolds. And in addition, the green Buy the Book/Donate button will take you to a separate page on our website where you can learn about ways that you can purchase Jill and Ron's books from Prairie Lights, as well as learn more information about those books. And you have information about how to make a donation to the City of Literature to help us continue to keep the book festival going and to keep it free. So with that, I would like to welcome Kathleen, who will introduce tonight's guests.
Thank you, John. Hello, everyone. I'm Kathleen Johnson. Hello. I don't know if Hi, everyone. Thank you, John. I'm Kathleen Johnson with Prairie Lights Bookstore, and tonight I am very delighted to welcome two writers from North Carolina. We have Jill McCorkle and Ron Rash joining us here in the Midwest. It's a rare treat. Often we invite them, or them and authors from the East Coast or from the Middle Coast or from the mountains, as they say. And they don't always get to travel here because traveling is one thing, but here we are. The internet is another. So it's a big pleasure to have them here. Just to tell you a little bit about them, both are excellent novelists, and they also teach. Ron Rash is the John and Dorothy Paris, has the professorship of Appalachian Cultural Studies at Western Carolina University, where he teaches poetry and fiction writing in the Department of English. And Jill McCorkle teaches both as a faculty member of the Bennington College Writing Seminars, and she's affiliated with the MFA program at North Carolina State University, where I believe they call her somewhat euphemistically a professor of the practice. Why do you think they're afraid to say it right, Jill?
I don't know. I'm just always practicing, always trying to get it right.
Okay. All right. Jill is the author of many books, two of which she wrote right after college. She's the author of the novels The Cheerleader, July 7th, Tending to Virginia, Ferris Beach, Carolina Moon, and Life After Life. And she's done also, and Life After Life ties in a little bit to Hieroglyphics, which is the book we'll be talking about tonight. And the story collections Crash Diet, Final Vinyl Days, Creatures of Habit, and Going Away Shoes. Ron also has written several books. He is talking today about In the Valley, which is a novella plus some short stories. And they hearken back to a previous novel, Serena, which was, you might have seen that it was a movie, you might have seen it on the hardcover fiction New York Times book review. He's also the author of The Cove, Nothing Gold Can Stay, which was a short story collection, the poetry Eureka Mill, Among the Believers, Raising the Dead, Waking, other short story collections, The Night the New Jesus Fell to Earth and Other Stories from Cliffside, North Carolina, Casualties, Chemistry and Other Stories, Burning Bright, and the before mentioned Nothing Gold Can Stay. The novels, this just goes on and on, Ron. One Foot in Eden, Safe with the River, The World Made Straight, the before mentioned Serena, The Cove, Above the Waterfall, The Risen, this new collection In the Valley, which, like I said, is stories and a novella, and a children's book, The Shark's Tooth. That was a real surprise to me. What made you write a children's book, Ron? Is it this new grandchild of yours?
Well, this was earlier. Actually,
it's not new.
Yeah, a neighbor. Ooh, I'm echoing. Is that okay? Yeah, I had a neighbor who kind of bullied me into it, and she had a little publishing place, and it's the one book I set outside of Appalachian Mountains. I set it at the coast, and it was about this little girl who would the sharks would throw their teeth to her, and that summer, in typical Rash fashion, there were like the biggest number of shark attacks on the North Carolina beach in history. So, I could imagine, these poor kids, thinking this was a good idea to go out there and try to be with the sharks. So even when I try to be upbeat.
Right. All right. Well, the two of you have been friends for a long time, I understand. So I don't know if you want to tell us a little bit about that. And you both read each other's books, so feel free to ask each other questions, and we'll just keep going from there. So why don't you start with Jill? Why don't you tell me first? You can start with how you guys are friends.
Oh wow! How many years? I mean, it's been a lot of years, and just memorable times when we have overlapped at conferences that just ended up being wonderful storytelling conversations. That one night there were several of us telling ghost stories that will just remain just an amazing night. Actually, we somebody should have been recording it. Actually, it was pretty great.
It really was, yeah.
But I just think Ron is without a doubt one of the very, very best short story writers in this country, and I teach his stories, and I just am always in the greatest admiration of just his writing style and the twists and turns these stories take. I mean, I'm gonna talk like you're not here, Ron. I mean, he really, I pride myself on following the little logical breadcrumbs, that have to be there, need to be there. And I'm always thinking, oh, well, I'll figure this out. I'll know where it's going. And Ron is just a writer who always surprises me, but in the same moment I'm surprised, it's like, why didn't I see this coming? And this new book is full of those moments, but in particular this novella, and I can't give away anything. You have to read it, but I realized that I had read several pages and realized I maybe needed to stop and take a breath.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I knew Jill before I met her. I was in my early 20s, and I was trying to get a poem or story published anywhere, And so I go to the library, and this woman has already published 2 novels. And what were you, 23 or 24?
25.
25. Well, that still didn't, no, I was late 20s, and I thought, I hate this woman. You know, this is not fair. And then, of course, I met you, and now, and I suddenly realized, and I can still remember those books, the Cheerleader and 4th of July. I mean, and we got to know each other, and that was great. And I think we've become very close friends, and we have a number of friends together. And I think this new book is at times harrowing, but at times, ultimately, I think about just as honest a depiction of a marriage as possible, a long marriage. And they're just moments that I've been rereading a lot of Chekhov. And I think what strikes me about Chekhov is he really seems to get to the heart of people in relationships. I mean, he kind of strips away all the illusions. And I think Jill does that. And I just want to read one paragraph that just knocked me out, because I just think it's why we read, to get moments where something that maybe we felt or thought to believe becomes true. But this is about Frank and his wife Lil. They've been married a very long time. Now they're both in their 80s, and this is just this one little paragraph. Lil liked to say maybe it was a match made in tragedy, because they both had horrible things happen to their families. I'll restart it again. Lil liked to say maybe it was a match made in tragedy. They had built an happy life on top of it. The knowledge and experience of tragedy groaned and heaved like an old furnace in the basement, and ultimately sent waves of warmth that radiated and lit the good parts. Now, fragments of memory coursed through his veins like the pieces of plaque that threatened to seize his heart. That's pretty damn good.
Thank you, Ron.
Touching
you.
and dark.
Yeah. True to the world.
Well, Jill, do you have a short section you'd like to read for us?
No, we didn't plan on this, so yeah.
From mine or Ron's?
From yours.
Yeah.
We talked about it. You don't have to.
We did.
If you don't want to, we don't have to do this.
No, I'm fine. I'm going to read my character Lil, who you just mentioned, is basically the whole novel going through old notes and things she's written in her journals and just sort of putting it all together. And so I'll just read a little memory from when they were actually on a vacation in Italy at the Foundling Hospital, and in Florence. And many of these pieces she's writing to her children. So that's the sort of you in there. At the Foundling Hospital, I stared at that large wheel that rotates into the ancient building, and I tried to imagine how a mother would feel placing her newborn there, and then in one half turn losing sight of her forever. Almost always it was forever, though the hopeful ones penned notes or little bits of jewelry, something sewn into the swaddling that the child might someday present as proof of heritage. It seems I stood there for a very long time, and it's one of those memories that comes to me so often. The light was so beautiful, like nothing I had ever seen. And as we walked through the building, I was aware of my hands pressing into the wood and stone of hallways and staircases, joining the prints of hundreds of years the dust and oils of lives long over and yet still lingering there. You could feel them, hear them whisper. We were about to head back out into the light to drink wine and talk and laugh, and then to our tiny room to make love, our young limbs wrapped and entwined like supple vines, and then sleep and wake to start life all over again. We were already thinking of you both, even though we probably couldn't have said so in the moment. But how could I not think of you when standing there in that ancient place in front of a display of hundreds of tokens meant for the sake of remembering and reuniting? The thimbles and buttons and lockets and coins, tiny brass fish and hairpins and keys, all marked in ways that make them unique. All there to say, I love you, I'll be back. Please don't forget me, I'll be back.
Lovely. Well, I love the voice of Lil. I just love just the whole way you wove together all the notes and correspondence and just her voice. I also really like the voice of the little boy. Is it Harvey?
Harvey.
He is just a wonderful character with a just a very blunt, refreshing child's perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, he would have loved Ron's children's book. He's a pretty dark little boy.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah. Do you enjoy writing children? I know you write older people really well, as evidenced by your previous work. But
you know,
really
I do. I love the ends of the spectrum of life, because I think at either end we are without our filters. You know, as children, we haven't had society impose things on us. So there's this kind of wonderful freedom to think and say things and not be as self-conscious as we grow into, as we become aware of other things. And then, you know, the other end of life, the filter has disintegrated or just left altogether, and you don't give a damn, whatever. And there is the same sense of liberation on the page, I think. Hopefully in life too. Well, but no, I love children for that reason, the honesty.
Well, now I also have an older parent. I understand you do too, your mother.
Yes.
Have you heard any funny, unfiltered commentary from the older end of the spectrum recently that you'd like to share?
I mean, it's a constant. Yeah, and I mean, I can tell one of my favorite stories, because like this isn't television, right? I mean, it's like we're in a bookstore. No, it's not. It's not too censored. No, one time I went to see my mother. This was a few years ago when she was still, you know, kind of up and around. And in the lunchroom, there were quite a few ladies sitting at a table. And, you know, everyone at the table with dementia. And I walk up and I say to my mom, "Oh, well, I brought you some things today." And this one little woman said, "Well, what'd you bring me? It's rude if you didn't bring me something." And I said, "Oh, well, you know, I'm sorry. Next time I'll bring you something." And she said, "Well, now that you're rude, tell us what you brought her." And I said, "Well," I said, "you know, I brought her a sweater and 2 bras." At which point my mother said, "Don't say bra in the lunchroom." You know, she gets really upset with me. At which point, but, you know, I said, "But you're really going to like them because everything's really comfortable and they go over your head." And this one woman said, "Over her head? They're supposed to go over her titties.
Right.
So,
Yeah, my mom will just start laughing at something like that. Like, over your head? Oh.
somehow the
oddest
whole
thing.
lunchroom knew it was funny. It was like if you had told that to a 5th grade class, you know, they all were laughing. So there's if you stay long enough, there's still a lot of joy and laughter to be found.
Well, you you represent the different age. I mean, you had kind of like a three generations in I mean, not all related, but some related in the book, and you represent the age groups very well. So
Thank you.
I really enjoyed that aspect of your book.
Thank you.
Any comments on that, Ron?
Yeah, you know, I think I'm becoming one of those people. I was teaching my class Monday night, and we were in this building, and we share it with the music department. And I was teaching, I had my door closed, and like 10 or 15 of the band students just came out in the hall right in front of my classroom and were tooting and talking. And I just opened the door, and I said, "Go away. We are superior artists. We can make music even without sounds." And I just kind of thought, "Damn, what's wrong with me?" You know, I would normally, and I realized that I'm becoming a Jill McCorkle character.
Oh my goodness! There might have been some fist waving then. No.
Well, I won't go into that, but anyway, yeah. But my students enjoyed it. You know, they were quite amused.
I bet they did.
That. Well, not the gentlest segue, I guess, but Ron, would you like to read us some of the prologue from In the Valley, or
Yeah.
or if you guys would like to talk about something else first?
I'm eager to hear him read. And
Me too.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah, this is the opening of the novella. Serena Pemberton has come back from South America, and she's going to, finish up her business in North Carolina, actually destroying the last valley that the Pemberton Lumber Company owned. Just one little detail at the end of this section. The woman who comes up to Serena, who's fearless enough to ask her a question, she's a journalist for the New Republic, is actually is based on Martha Gellhorn, who was a pretty amazing journalist and writer, married to Hemingway for a little while, and pretty daunting character in her own way. When Serena Pemberton stepped out of the Commodore seaplane in July of 1931, a small but fervent contingent of reporters and photographers awaited her. Except for the pilot, she was alone. Those who would accompany her to the logging camp, both beast and human, had arrived by ship the night before. They were already on the train that would take them from Miami to North Carolina, all except for her minion Galloway, who procured an automobile to drive Serena to the station. As the metal ramp was ready, Galloway positioned himself beside the bottom step. He was short and wiry, shabbily dressed, a purple stump protruding from one sleeve. As cameras flashed mere inches from his face, he did not blink. As Serena descended, the first question shouted at her addressed the rumors surrounding her husband's death. For a moment, it didn't appear she would answer, but when her booted feet settled securely on the ground, the question was asked again, but with a caveat. Had she loved her husband? I loved my husband, but one always learns from disappointments. But what of his death, Mrs. Pemberton, and what of so many others of your acquaintance? The reporter asked. Logging is a dangerous business, she answered. Galloway was in front of her now, but Serena, almost a head taller, was clearly visible. He cleared a path as more questions came. Would she continue to fight against the national park? Would she address the rumor she was connected to the recent demise of Horace Kephart, the park's advocate? Did she oppose the Davis-Bacon Act? Why risk a transatlantic enterprise when she and her late husband had achieved so much in the States? Galloway opened the DeSoto's passenger door. Serena was about to get in when the sole woman in the group, a reporter for the New Republic, stepped close. She was very young, but like Serena, tall and blonde. When will you have achieved all your ambitions, Mrs. Pemberton, she asked as others jostled around them. When the world and my will are one, Serena answered. And I thought it would be fun because that she ought to have her just like descend out of the skies like a Valkyrian out of a Wagnerian opera. So I thought that would be a good entrance for her.
Oh, wow. Yes. I mean, Serena is just, what a character she is. Whew. And Galloway, oh my. And the eagle, the whole entourage.
They're like a vaudeville troupe. Yeah,
oh, boy.
Well, Jill asked you an interesting question the other day about what it was like to write a novella. And I wondered if you could explain a little bit about the form. And we have a question. Someone's saying that she'd love to hear about your character development and story development as well, Ron. So,
well, I knew when I went back, I've never wanted to write a sequel, and I didn't, I've always feared, I don't want a Ghostbusters 2, and I felt like Serena was a novel that I felt very good about, and I didn't want to, feel like I was just putting an appendage onto it. And so it took me 3.5 years, and a couple of things I think were important. One was certainly a character named Ross, who'd been a minor character in Serena. It always haunted me, and in a way, he was the impetus to get back into that. I felt like he had a story I wanted to hear myself. But then I knew I didn't want to write a novel, and a short story didn't seem right. And I've always admired novellas. It's a difficult form, and I found out how difficult it was. But particularly, there's Dennis Johnson has a novella called Train Dreams, which I think is just about as perfect a novella as I know. And that one, I wanted to try it, but I really didn't feel, and this kind of ties into the structural question that we got on the internet. I felt like this thing had to hold together by itself, and I finally realized that if I could make the valley like an arc, biblical arc, and have the animals at the end of almost every other chapter leave first the higher mammals, then the birds and the fish, that it would give a kind of completeness to the book. And I also wanted to do something with the dialect I've been wanting to do, and that was I use an iambic pentameter line for the characters, the logers, and to work that against the dialect, I thought was a lot of fun, and I entertained myself with that. But I don't, I didn't want it to jump out at the reader, but I think the reader's ear probably hears it.
The italicized sections are just exquisite, and it really does give it a whole different level of feeling. I mean, it makes, I mean, it sort of lifts it more to the novel, Immediately you're aware of this different blueprint.
Well, good. I mean, yeah, because I didn't feel good about it until I figured that out. Yeah.
Yeah. Plus, it's like watching this. It's like an update of the shifts over time and the loss.
Well, and I think, the perils of children. We see Harvey in your book, and in this one we see Rachel and her child, and yeah,
yes, but I love the way those italicized sections both show the predators of the world, the creatures, but also sort of the simplest, the most beautiful. So it really is that whole microcosm rather than just the threat. I mean, because there's so much threat in what's happening in this novella, that those pieces are almost biblical in a certain way. I mean, it's more the bigger story of a creation, but in reverse.
Yeah. Another impetus for this book was, what's happening right now as far as environmental regulations and wilderness areas, that what they're trying to do to the fisheries, the salmon fisheries in Alaska. And that was another reason, I wanted to go back to show how hard won these parks were. And just how terrible a lot of what's happening right now.
Well, that's the other thing that's just so vivid and is when you read Serena. But again, I was just so taken, with the detail of the whole logging industry, and especially in that mountainous terrain and what they're up against.
Well, the person who asked the question asked an interesting question about characters, and I want to hear what you have to say about that. I'll just briefly say that for me, I tend to start with images, so that is part of it. But I feel like I really know a character when I hear that character's voice. What about you, Jill? I mean, when do you feel like you really are starting to hone in on these characters?
Yeah, I mean, I also feel I'm often character driven, and I often find my way into a character through the very kind of objects, that Lil has collected, or Harvey with his childish collections. When we know the objects that surround someone, and I always tell my students, if you know what someone loves more than anything else, and what stands to hurt them, what's the kryptonite for this person, that's really all you need to know.
Yeah.
And everything else falls into place, because those are often two things we don't immediately share with others. We keep those cards close to the chest, and so to reveal that, and I'm not always sure what that is for a character. So I think for me, a lot of times the challenge is locating, and sometimes I might think I know, like in the novel, there's the whole concern that there's been this infidelity in the marriage. And I don't think I'm giving away too much when I say that, Lil kind of shocks herself when she realizes she's upset about the physical transgression, but she's more upset that there might have been some kind of psychological betrayal. Did you talk about my mother? Did you talk about our dog? So that sense of being invaded. And I think that was more of a threat to her than anything, that her life had been her privacy threatened.
Well, and Jill, in the novel, you also got sort of the very clear thing that both Lil and her husband are dealing with, that they both were forced to grow up too soon because of the loss early in their lives.
Yes.
And so they're kind of, that has a big theme that sort of goes through the whole thing.
It does, and I think oftentimes the same way, and Ron, I know can speak to this, because the setting, that North Carolina setting, is just so vivid and real, and the logging industry, and so for me in this novel, those real anchors were these two catastrophic events that had actually happened, where both Lil and Frank each lost a parent. And that was a real train wreck that happened in my native county in North Carolina in 1943, almost, just a little more than a year after the Coconut Grove fire in Boston, where Lil's mother basically went out one night and did not return. And so, having those real events in the background, I found when I do something like that, it anchors it in place. You always have something to go back to. I don't know, Ron. I mean, I'm thinking that you, with the forest of North Carolina and just the state of the mountains, that it would be a similar thing. You're writing a scene and you need to simulate the passage of time, and you break the scene and you rely on these physical elements of a work to it's more than just filling in the space, because it heightens, I think, what the reader is seeing.
Well, and landscape can become a character. That's what I find, and I actually have a character in one of my novels say that, landscape is destiny. And one of my novels, actually, that's at the center of it, the cove. I think, and I think the landscape reveals the characters. And, one thing I'm just fascinated by is how the psychology of the landscape that a person grows up in. I remember the first time I went to the Midwest, I felt naked. I really felt like the expanse was just overwhelming, because I was used to mountains and hills, and it was very unsettling. And yet, I think that landscape lends itself to, some brilliant works, and obviously, and I love to read, I love books. One of my favorite writers right now is Mo Yan, a Chinese writer. And he does has this amazing ability of connecting landscape and character, particularly in Red Sorghum. So those writers always, you want to use everything you've got, and landscape is something that is, and it doesn't have to be rural. Richard Price is wonderful at landscape of New York City. He's my favorite New York writer. And what he does with landscape, I feel like I'm there, and his characters reflect it.
Yeah. No, sorry. I was just going to say our early sense of home and place. I don't know. I'm projecting. I tend to think we never fully get away from that. Even those people who want to run from it, and I have not run from it. But it's just always there. And when I sit down to write, very often I go back to these little places, years having students on the first day write what comes to mind when they hear the word home. And what's been so interesting is what I've gotten most often are childhood beds and kitchen tables. So it's not even the landscape out the window. A lot of times it's more, that inner room, which I did use, for these characters. I'm sorry that I interrupted you.
That was great. It's hard to not interrupt on this format, so that's good because I want you two to talk. I was just going to say that I got another question in for Ron. He says, to the best of my knowledge, Ron has never written about current politics directly, but politics, obviously, you've mentioned it that it's really important to you. Have the past 4 years have had any influence on your current work? And this question comes from my husband Dave, who you are his favorite writer. Earlier in the pandemic, he was trying to read some newer books I gave him. One was a biography of a musician, one was something else. And he just finally just put them down and said, I've just got to read Nothing Gold Can Stay Again.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I think I do. But here's the way I view, by writing about the past, I find it a very kind of subversive way of writing about the present. And so In the Valley, is as much about right now, what's happening environmentally as it was in 1931. But it's such a fascinating way, I think, to comment because it's as I say, it's almost subversive and the reader, you kind of unmoor the reader. And a great example of this is Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies, Hilary Mantel's trilogy, which is magnificent. But what she's talking about is the middle class. Mm-hmm. Cromwell is in that place where he's constantly aware that how tenuous his position is. And, to me, that's wonderful when a writer is writing about the past and the present and perhaps the future simultaneously. And I think that's the way I view my work, because it obviously is, it has a huge impact on what's going on. The first story in this collection, Neighbors, is about tribalism. And a reason I put that story first is because it's about right now and the risk of what this country could come to. But I said it in the past, but I think any reader is going to recognize that what I'm dealing with is actually in some ways even more about the present.
Right.
Well, no, I recognize that connection in Neighbors. I thought it was Confederate soldiers versus Union soldiers, but so
speaking of
both
stories
of you,
with a good twist.
Yes, both of you then stay within your art and your profession to address politics. Are either of you ever tempted to, get on social media or get on, write an article for The Guardian or for, any, Time Magazine, Lit Hub, anywhere about current politics? Do you ever have that urge?
4 years ago, I wrote an editorial actually for the New York Times. It was supposed to be published before the election, or I thought it was going to be, a warning about Trump and that, people better and what the people in, particularly in Appalachia, why they would vote for Trump. But I write for Le Monde. I've written articles about current politics, water quality, those kinds of things. But I view the difference is that in my writing, I want to be more witness than advocate. And I just don't feel, I think it's a matter of respect for my audience. I don't have to tell them what to think. I'll present it as honestly as I can, but I see when I do op-eds and have done those, and Jill and I both have been doing some political things in North Carolina.
Yes.
So we do these things, but I think, well, I don't know, Jill, what's your view on this?
Well, no, I'm very much where you are with this, because I had a piece in Lit Hub like a couple of weeks ago, and the American Scholar is about to repost a piece I wrote before the last election that was kind of a spoof on my idea of how to have an election, like lock them in a room and make them write their answers in a blue book, I'd love to see that one. But anyway, so I have written op-eds, and I have to. I feel like it's important for all of us as citizens to be conversing and speaking in whatever way. I think as a writer, it's easier for me to sit down and type something, than it is to stand up and speak. But so there it's very important in my life. But I think on the page, I'm more focused on the characters and their lives. And I was thinking as I was listening to Ron speak, no one does good and evil Ron's got it in hand. And I think what strikes me when I'm reading your work is those times, and they're just everywhere, where we come across these traces of humanity. And, in these stories, in the novella, you come across that trace, and it's like waking up to goodness, and you say, yes, that's the way it should be. That's the way a person should interact. And I think anytime you realistically depict a universal story, you're going to have what's good and what's evil running against each other. And so I like to think as a writer that I'm pulling for my people, to find redemption. They don't always. That wouldn't be a realistic way. And I think that, I don't know, I'm losing steam here, but I think that by depicting a certain kind of humanity on the page, that it does, I feel my beliefs are out there, if that makes sense.
No, I think it does. And I think, one thing that, a couple of things about that. One is that when I was young, I remember reading in my 20s, when I was reading you and getting my rejection slips coming in, I read an interview with Faulkner, I think when he was at the University of Virginia, and somebody was asking him about his grand themes and, all of that. And he said, I write about people. And I thought at that time, he was being very disingenuous. But the more I write, the older I get, I really believe that's what it comes down to. And we want to do that in a way that doesn't just give the reader what the reader wants, to confirm the reader's prejudices, and I mean prejudice in the broadest sense. I see a lot of that on the left as well as the right. And I think the area I want to be in is where I don't allow easy assumptions. And I think if we're true to life, that's where most people are. And I love it. There's another quote by Faulkner I love, and I think this is one that I think I see with your characters, Jill, is that he said that he believed that most people were a little bit better than their circumstances ought to allow.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and certainly I know a number of people that are worse, but, and, we know those people, we know them.
Right.
But I really, I do believe that. And I don't think that's a sentimental belief. I think that's
Well,
reality.
no. And what you have done with the whole community of addiction with emphasis on, the whole math scene. I mean, you without judgment. And I think when you can successfully create a character without judgment, I mean, there is nothing more heartbreaking than some of those stories you've written in that way. And that's why, I mean, you don't preach, you don't judge. If anything, we're just getting this realistic depiction of someone losing a battle. And it really, it asks us, to imagine ourselves in that position, in those conditions. And I think there's not enough of that going on. There's not enough of the looking out and imagining how others are living right now.
Yeah. We're a little short on empathy these days.
We're totally short on. I like to save little quips that I overhear or eavesdrop, never knowing whose mouth it'll come out. And I had saved one for years and years, and I finally gave it to Lil that she overheard it. But now, probably 15 years ago, I walked into the dry cleaners, and the woman said to me, she said, "The humility is just awful, isn't it?" And I said, "Oh my God."
Yeah, you got to write those down and save them. There's no doubt about that.
I mean, and the humility has just gotten worse and worse, I would say.
Well, Eudora Welty has a great quote about, she says, the writer should never condescend to, well, she says his characters, but obviously his or her characters. And I think that's a pretty good, I think you do that. And I think the writers that I most admire, I think do that. I'm rereading Chekhov, and that's been a delight. I've probably read 50 stories in the last 6 weeks. I'm and I've never, he was a writer that I never quite got, but it was my limitations, not his, believe me. And, but I've been reading some of those stories, and I'm just astounded by what he's doing. And the one that is staying with me, and I'm actually listening to a biography of him right now, and I was really glad to see it was a story that he loved. There's a story he wrote called The Student. Have y'all read that?
I don't know that. But I'm going to go find it right after this.
I'm just going to give you the synopsis because it's worth hearing, and it's worth hearing for the audience because I know that maybe we have a few people who are writers, but just lovers of reading. But it's a story about a divinity student in Russia, of course, rural area, and he's walking toward home, and he's still got a ways, several miles to go. And he's, his family's probably middle class, whatever that would be then. But he sees, he goes by a house where there's just this old woman and her daughter living alone, and they're poverty stricken. They're actually cooking their food outside on a fire. And he sees them, and he's cold, so he goes up there, and they offer him soup, and he takes it, but he feels like, I should give them something. So he starts essentially giving a sermon, but it's about Peter. Peter denying Christ in the New Testament. It was 3 times. And he tells the story, but he also is emphasizing what Peter would have felt afterwards, and what and then he looks up and he realizes the woman's crying. I mean, this woman who's been through hellish life, poor, cold, misery. She's a washerwoman trying to get a little bit of money that way, I think. And but it's about the power of story, because as he leaves, he realizes that this story that's 2,000 years old can be carried this long and still bring tears to a human being. And that's so damn brilliant. But it's I think it's what stories can do. It's what novels can do. And I really don't think that will ever be obsolete. I don't think that movies, internet game, whatever. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think there's something that happens when we merge those splotches of ink on the page and the ourselves, our own imagination. That, to me, it's an act of communion. I mean, it really is, which kind of is, I think,
It
what
really
I'm
is.
getting to.
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
agree. Do either of you ever read your older work and realize things about them, or realize things that might have been going on in the world that influenced you that you didn't really think about at the time?
Go ahead, Jim.
I think I see things that are going on in sort of domestic life around me, for sure. It's kind of hard for things not to blow in, like when my kids were younger, and just certain details. But probably in the same way, what was going on in the world, especially in something that feels really contemporary, with that kind of character who just talks all the time. And I like to have that person on the page every now and then too. And that character for me is more likely to talk about what's going on in the news, or to sort of name drop current references of what's going on. And so in that way, I definitely would see it.
Yeah. Well, I had something kind of eerie, but I wrote a novel called The Cove, and there's a character in it called Chauncey Fife, who's this guy who doesn't go to war. He's wealthy, and he is a recruiter, even though he hasn't gone, and he goes around with his uniform that he hasn't worn. And he has a moment where he actually says that, he has courage too, that bravery is not just someone who goes out into battle for a few minutes and is suddenly brave. And, this was, I guess I wrote that book, I guess it's been about 10 years ago, but I just sensed, I'm not a prophet, but I just sensed something was going on in this country. I mean, it was going on then, but I just sensed that someone like him could emerge, and unfortunately I was right.
Yeah. No, it's very strange when that happens. I remember when I was working on years ago on Ferris Beach, and the whole time, all of a sudden I think, oh my God, the dad is going to die. And I never saw that coming. And I would notice he was coughing a lot, and there were things going on. And of course, then I realized that was the only thing that was going to make the protagonist sort of grow up in the way she needed to grow up, and change the dynamics in the household. And so I went ahead and, and it was one of those moments when people would say to me, "Why did you kill him?" And I was feeling guilty already. But logically, it worked its way. But then my own dad, just a few years later, was diagnosed way too young with cancer. He had quit smoking 10 years before, but he had been a heavy smoker all those years. And it's the same thing. I mean, at the time I was like, did some part of me, pick up on something, or was it just a fear inside of me? And at the time I thought, oh, well, maybe I should just write about people who go on exotic vacations and have a good time just sitting on the beach. But I didn't do that either. But no, it's just very strange, because I do think that when you're really immersed in work and those details, the same way, I mean, the quote that I keep by my desk is the Kierkegaard, life must be lived forward, but it can only be understood backwards. And it's the way that the older we get, we look back and you can see why things happened the way that they did, and you understand things that you never saw before. And in that same way, when you're writing a novel, that's the exciting power of it. That moment when you get the rough draft and you're like, whoa, and suddenly you see it like this kind of map.
Yeah.
And it's very clear. But
Well, I want to thank both of you for being here. It's just been incredible to talk with you. I'll just remind our viewers, we're talking with Jill McCorkle about hieroglyphics, Ron Rash about In the Valley. Both terrific books, both dark in their own ways, but both obviously show your love for humanity and love for people, even when it's clear they've got nothing good coming to them. We can still see the heart beating within both of you authors, and the love you have for your characters. And thanks so much, and thanks to everyone out there for joining us and sending in your questions.
Well,
Thank
I hope I
Kathleen.
can come to your store sometime in person. I would love that. I've never been to Iowa. That's one of the few states I've
I
never
didn't
been.
think so.
So
I didn't think so. Well,
I've only
you are
been
both-
once, and it was years ago.
Well, I thought you might have, Jill, because Paul Ingram, who is my mentor, who was the longtime book buyer, said, "Oh, Jill's nice."
I thought
So
I
I'm
once
briefly on the
thought
street
it
the
was
other day.
years ago. So I'm like Ron. I look forward to when we're all sort of moving around again.
Yeah. Well, good. I will take you both up on it. You guys are both invited next time. So
Great.
thank you
Thank
to the Iowa
you.
City Book Festival, and thank you, both of you, for joining us.
glad to be with you.
Ron,
All right,
I'll
bye-bye.
see you around.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Kathleen.
Thank
Bye.
you.
All right.